Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Megan Lebeda. I am a program manager here at Kirkwood Corporate Training, and I am so excited to have Sherry Zevenbergen with us today. Sherry is the owner and founder of the Dash Mindset. She is also a super good polka dancer, a recent visitor to the country of Vietnam, and super, super cool. She and her husband have booked a trip for 2024, and they have no idea where they're going. I cannot wait to do that for myself. And I'm so excited for you, Sherry. And in the interest of time and in the goal of having as much time with you as we can, Sherry, I'm going to turn it over to you right away. So everybody, please welcome Sherry Zevenbergen of the Dash Mindset.
You so much, Megan, for that introduction. And yeah, if you want to know anything more about my surprise trip, I'm happy to answer any questions about that, although I might not have any answers quite yet. So thank you, everyone. You can see my screen and everything, right, Megan? We're good? Okay.
Yes, we are.
All right, fantastic. So today I want to talk about the importance of self-awareness for you and your organization, not just because I want to talk about it, but because it's actually very important. And so today I'm going to be sharing why it's important, and also share some tools that I use with my clients to help them develop and apply that self-awareness. And I'll also share some things that you can ask yourself so that you can become more self-aware as well. So you'll have something to walk away with. So Megan will be sharing a handout that you can look at as we go too, or when we're done as well. So the importance of self-awareness. So why isn't it working? There we go. Okay, so why is self-awareness important? On a global level, 23% of employees are engaged, 59% of employees are disengaged, and 18% are actively disengaged. So that means they're loudly disengaged, right? They're not the quiet quitters like the disengaged ones. They're just actively disengaged. So what is employee engagement? Because that's one of those words we use a lot. It kind of, it's one of those maybe fluffy words that's often used, but sometimes we don't necessarily think about what does that actually mean when we're using some of those fluffy words. So based on what Gallup says and based on the studies they do, it's the involvement and enthusiasm of employees in both their work and workplace. And I actually take it one step further when I work with people. I definitely consider what their level of involvement and enthusiasm is from a work standpoint, but I'm also interested in what their level of involvement and enthusiasm is in other aspects of their life. So we have our professional lives and we have our personal lives, and the two, compartmentalizing the two is really difficult to do. And, one feeds into the other. So I consider the engagement from all standpoints. So why are employees disengaged? Why are they disengaged? So here are just some of the reasons, all of which are valid and all of which I know each of you has either experienced or heard about, or maybe you're experiencing it right now, but there are a number of factors at play here. Disengaged employees have a tendency to say they feel stagnant. There's a lack of feedback. They're being micromanaged. Maybe they don't feel a lack of purpose. They don't feel a connection to the vision. Maybe onboarding was inadequate. Maybe their training is inadequate. There are lots of valid reasons for feeling disengaged. But I want to go one step further and really think about, okay, what's underlying all of that? Because so often disengaged employees don't just have one particular reason they point to, they have several of them, maybe even all of them. And so I want to go one step further and really point out the fact that we often don't know what we don't know. And I know that seems so obvious, right? We don't know what we don't know. But one of the things we don't know is that we lack self-awareness. And self-awareness to me is really the key to understanding most of the conflicts in our life. So 95% of people believe they're self-aware. However, only 10 to 15% of us actually are self-aware. And a phrase that I use often is, you can't read the label when you're in the jar. And I have to give credit to one of my coaches, Kristen Sherry. She's the one who developed UMAP, which is a tool I'll talk a little bit about. But she says this all the time, and it's so very true. You can't see the forest through the trees. You can't see the label when you're in the jar. And we often feel like we should have an understanding of ourselves, and we believe we do have an understanding of ourselves because we're with ourselves all the time. It just seems that so apparent that we should understand ourselves. And excuse me, I apologize because my allergy is a little feisty today. So even when it seems like other people should have self-awareness, they often don't. And what I often say, in addition to saying you can't read the label when you're in the jar, is you can't see the spinach in your own teeth. And part of me was a little hesitant to include this picture because I feel bad for this lady, but I trust that she knows there's something in her teeth, and she knew that her picture was being taken. So I trust that she knows it's out there in the world. And so here we are. But to us, it's quite apparent that this lady has something in her teeth. I don't know about her, but we've all been in a situation, and I'd love for you to just think about a time when you've been in a situation with someone else where it was so apparent to you that they lacked any sort of awareness. Maybe it was the spinach in their teeth. Maybe it was something they were doing that was being intrusive to someone else. Maybe they were being rude, whatever it was. It just seemed so apparent to us that they lacked self-awareness, but they were just going along, minding their own business, smiling the whole time because they just lacked that self-awareness. So what is self-awareness? Harvard Business Review defines it this way. So internal self-awareness is how clearly we see our own values, passions, aspirations, fit with our environment, reactions, which includes thoughts, feelings, behaviors, strengths, and weaknesses, and the impact it has on other people. And external self-awareness is our understanding of how other people view us in terms of those same factors listed above. And often we have a very different perspective of ourselves than others have of us, right? Another reason why it's really hard to see the label, to read the label when we're in the jar. So what? So we lack self-awareness. We lack an awareness of our lack of self-awareness, right? So what? Who cares? Well, here's why we care. Because when we develop and apply self-awareness, it impacts all of these things. And I know this is a lot of words for a PowerPoint, and so I'm just going to highlight a few. And you're familiar with all of these things. But when we develop and apply self-awareness, it increases our engagement in all aspects of our life. And like we talked about, there's so many disengaged people in this world. And it increases retention, because if we go back here to all of these valid reasons people have for being disengaged, oftentimes we might say, oh, it might depend upon the day what we use as a reason for our disengagement. Oh, it's the culture. Oh, it's stress. Oh, we're being micromanaged, whatever. But if we have self-awareness, we're better able to pinpoint what specifically the problem is. And it gives us a better understanding of the problem. It allows us to explore possibilities for addressing the problem. And it gives us a better way to maybe even to pinpoint that problem. So maybe, quitting isn't the way. Maybe we simply shift something or adjust something in our work. If we have a better understanding of ourselves, it allows us to make a bigger impact in the way we want and have more meaning. It definitely impacts the quality of our relationships from a work standpoint, from a personal standpoint. All relations are impacted when we are more self-aware. And it allows us to better understand others as well. And it impacts decision-making. So many of our thoughts are just open cycles, these open decision cycles, because indecisiveness takes so much of our brain capacity. So just making a decision is so much easier if we're self-aware, which takes up so much space in our brain. Decreases turnover, which obviously is going to lead to a decrease in recruiting and onboarding costs, which are very expensive, as you know. It reduces overwhelm, stress, burnout, all of those things, which was one of the reasons a lot of people are disengaged. And it decreases misunderstandings and miscommunication. And misunderstandings are often due to the fact that we just operate differently. So we understand ourselves based upon our intentions, but we judge other people based upon the results we see. And when we have differences in strengths and values and all of these things, we can only see what we can see, and we don't have an understanding of others. So it leads to misunderstandings and reduced effectiveness in our relationships. And it decreases cynicism and toxicity. And all of these feed into one another. So most of us are living and working on autopilot, and we're sabotaging ourselves and others every day, and we don't even know it. So I often think about in European Vacation. Hopefully you've seen it. If you haven't, you should watch it tonight. But when he's on the roundabout and he just can't get off. And that's the way we operate as humans a lot of the time. And the reason we operate on autopilot is there are so many factors, and I just picked a few. We're buried in busyness. How often do we think, oh, I'm just too busy. I'm too busy. I'm too busy. And it's so easy to stay in the busy. And it's really hard to get out of that and to feel like we can justify taking time to think beyond the busy. It feels normal because the people we surround ourselves by are experiencing the exact same thing in a lot of cases, or very close to what we're experiencing. And it's easy to have an all or nothing mentality. Well, I don't know what to do, so I guess I'll just stay and tolerate it. It's overwhelming to even consider how the challenges can be addressed, because we can't even pinpoint what the challenges are in a lot of cases. There's information coming at us all the time. I mean, our phones are vibrating and our watches are vibrating and our computers are vibrating and making noises all the time. There's just so much information, it's hard to weed through. And we're creatures of habit, and we have to be, because if we had to make a decision about every single thing in our life, if I had to decide how to get to Target every time I went to Target, my head would explode, right? So we're creatures of habit. And so there are certain things in our lives that we need to do on autopilot, but sometimes we start living in our entire life, our personal life, our work life on autopilot. And our brains protect us because they want us to cling to the familiar. Our brains want to be in the familiar because it's fearful of going beyond that, and it's trying to protect us from discomfort. And oftentimes we leave it up to someone else to figure out for us. There have been times I know throughout my career where I thought, well, this is something maybe my boss can help me with, or maybe someone else that's a leader in my organization, maybe they can help. And perhaps to some degree, but if we don't even have this self-awareness ourselves, it's really hard to articulate to someone else, okay, here's what I feel like is the problem. Here's what I really want. And if we don't have common language, it's hard for us to think that through and really articulate to others. And plus, leadership doesn't have time. They don't have time to figure out. You don't have time, if you're a leader, to figure out everyone on your team. And, if you're in that 95% too, might not even have a clear understanding of yourself. And we just lack the awareness that reprogramming of our brains is possible. So we've been conditioned to have certain beliefs based on our experiences, our surroundings, all of these things. And it seems like reprogramming and thinking something different might not even be possible if we even take the time to think about it. So what I do is partner with growth-oriented individuals and teams to stop living and working on autopilot and to unlock their true potential in their professional and personal lives. I really consider it all from a holistic standpoint. And I'm just going to get into the tip of the iceberg today, because obviously I love to talk about all of these things and could for hours and generally do. So, but an overview. This is my methodology, which it's a proven methodology that has helped a lot of people. And I tailor it based upon each team's unique needs. So this is my starting point, but it all starts with disrupting the default, which is that autopilot, stay on the roundabout mode, and really assessing, okay, where are you? Because if you don't have an understanding of where you are, it's really hard to determine how to get to where you want to be and where you're going. Specify who you are, what you want, where you want to go, and why. And why is key through all of this. And then really honoring who you are, honor the differences between you and other people, honor other people's differences, really recognize and appreciate your uniqueness and honor yourself in that. So what do you need to know about yourself? So UMAP is the tool that I mentioned. That is one of my foundational tools I use with people. And I'll talk a little bit about each of these, but there are 4 pillars within it, which allows a holistic perspective for people to really understand, how they do what they do, why they do what they do, and who they really are. So sometimes these might even conflict, Sometimes maybe we're in alignment with 3 of these things in our life, but not the 4th. So it makes it particularly difficult to really detect, okay, where something's feeling a little funky, something's feeling a little off in my life, but it's really hard to pinpoint because there are so many factors. So this allows people to do that more easily. So our values are why you do what you do. Why we do what we do is our values. That's really our compass throughout our lives. And it really allows us to make better decisions. And it's really, given it acts like a compass, it allows us, it's a navigational tool that really allows us to look to it and think, okay, if this is what I truly value, is what I'm experiencing aligning with what's truly important with me? But it takes time and reflection to really think that through. So in the handout you'll get, I have each of these questions that I'll ask you. But what I would love for you to think about is what is most important to you in your life? And why is it most important? And none of these questions that I'll be sharing are questions that you'll necessarily be able to answer right now within this very short period of time. But I really encourage you to reflect and take some time for yourself to think these through and think, what do I really value? Oftentimes our immediate response is, well, I value my family, I value my friends, and maybe that's where we stop, right? But what is it about your family that you really value? Is it the connection with your family? Is it quality time with your family? Is it the knowledge your family shares? So there's so many more questions we ask. So this is a starting point, but what's most important to you and why? And one thing I like to share with people as kind of a tip that has been helpful for me in identifying my own values is I ask myself what some of my biggest pet peeves are, because what we value is often the opposite of that. And an example of that for me is I get really amped up by condescending behavior and by bullying. It's just, that is a huge pet peeve for me. So it led me to recognize that kindness is one of my values. It's one of my key values. And the way I recognize that so easily is sometimes it's just in those normal moments in life, those common moments. But if I'm watching one of those, I'll say after school specials, even though I know those aren't even a thing anymore, you can watch whatever you want anytime. But if we're watching a show that has kids bullying other kids, I get physically amped up. Like I just get really annoyed. And I know it's a movie. I recognize it's a movie. It's not my kid actually being bullied or any other kid that I know. But my husband has said, Sherry, this isn't real. It's a movie. He has to remind me of that. I know, but it gets me amped up. And that has helped me recognize how important kindness is to me as a value. So everyone's values are different. And it's funny because my kids will laugh at me every time we watch those kind of movies. It's almost worse than me watching, I don't know, Freddy Krueger or something, probably. I get more amped up. So strengths are how you do what you do. And our strengths are just inherent, and we're born just being able to do certain things naturally. They're often very difficult for us to recognize because it's just how we do life. It's just how we do what we do. So if you've ever had an experience, which I'm sure that you have, it maybe you didn't recognize it at the time, but if you've ever had an experience where someone has said, how do you do that? And you think to yourself, do what? That is probably a strength of yours because everyone has different strengths. And so when you're operating in the way you operate and other people don't have that strength, it's really easy for them to recognize, but you're just going about your life, living life. So a question for you is, what are you naturally good at? And what are you most often complimented on? These are the things we often dismiss when we receive compliments because it's just, we're just doing what we do, right? But I really encourage you to think about what have you been complimented on and to not dismiss it and really think, oh, wait a minute, this is something not everybody can do. I know I'm flying through here. So the next one is skills, what you do. And skills are learned. Skills are what we gain from our experiences, from our training, from our work. And so my question for you is, what skills do you actually enjoy using? And which ones do you enjoy using consistently? When I do UMAP with people, it obviously gets into greater depth with this, but a question for you just to self-reflect on. There are a lot of skills that you might be good at, and maybe even feel like you should be using consistently, but they might be draining to you. So really think about which ones do you actually enjoy using. Sometimes they're tied to our strengths, but not always. So think about that, because if there are certain skills that you're using that are draining to you, they're likely not draining to somebody else. And oftentimes we just make assumptions because it seems like, well, we just operate the way we operate, and we have a certain expectation that other people are operating the same way, but somebody else might actually get joy out of something that drains you. So it's something to consider. And personality is who you are and what your interests are. So the other question I encourage you to ask, or one of the other questions, is what are 5 things you find particularly interesting? So we might be aligned from a strengths, values, and skills standpoint in our work, and maybe from a personal standpoint, but if we aren't actually interested in whatever it is that we're focusing on, it's really going to be hard to stay engaged in that. So what are 5 things that you find particularly interesting? They might seem completely unrelated to what you do, but there is likely some sort of a path that has led you to where you are, or some sort of a connection there that's just hard to see until you actually consider it. All right, so what keeps getting in the way? Another tool I use is Positive Intelligence, and this is actually a multi-week program that I work with people on, but we all have stuff that gets in the way. And sometimes we get frustrated by the stuff that gets in the way, and we get frustrated by the frustration that stuff keeps getting in the way. And we feel like, oh, I should be doing better. If I were just more disciplined, if I were just more focused, all of these things. Well, the truth is, as humans, we all have saboteurs, is what they're called from a positive intelligence standpoint. Basically, what they are is negative thoughts that don't go away. It's that yapping that each of us has. Sometimes it's screaming at us, and sometimes it feels like we're the only one, but all of us have these negative thoughts that get in the way, and some thoughts get in the way more than others. So I take people through an assessment and work with them through which ones are sabotaging them the most. And they're not only sabotaging us when we have these saboteurs, but they're also causing us to sabotage other people, because it impacts our relationships as well and our understanding of other people. So a human being can have around 60,000 thoughts per day. I've actually seen higher numbers than that, but according to Fred at Stanford, 60,000, and 90% of these are repetitive. So not only do we have 60,000 thoughts a day, but we're having a lot of the same thoughts on repeat throughout our lives. Not just the same thoughts I had yesterday, but for days and days and days prior. So our neural pathways in our brains have started to react in a certain way, or they have throughout our lives, and it's possible to reprogram those. So when we think about this, and we also think about the indecisiveness we have due to our lack of a navigational guide, it's really clear why sometimes we stay in autopilot. So it's possible to intercept our negative thoughts, or those saboteurs, and shift to a positive mindset instead. But it takes developing self-awareness to actually figure out, okay, how do I intercept this? How do I even identify this negative thought? And then how do I intercept it and shift it? So a question I'd like to leave you with is, in general, when you think about your working relationships and the people in your work environment, what 3 things would you like someone to know about working with you? Sometimes we just leave it up to experience for people to understand us to the degree we think they should. And it just takes a while to kind of figure one another out. But it's so much easier if we just understand ourselves better, and then we make that known and say, hey, here are 3 things that you might want to know about working with me. And if people within a group just share those thoughts, it just makes it a whole lot easier. So there's some questions for you to take, and I encourage you to reflect on that. I'm going to leave you with why the heck I'm called the Dash Mindset. So I'm the Dash Mindset because all we have between when we're born and when we die is our dash. And I know that I don't mean to leave you with a somber, kind of downer thought, but it's true. And we can take that and shift it to a positive by knowing that each of us is mortal. Every one of us is mortal. And if we really recognize the fact that we do have limited time, and that each of us has uniqueness to offer in that limited time, it allows us to really take advantage of that time we have. So here's where you can follow me and reach out to me. And obviously, I encourage you to reach out to Megan and to Kirkwood Corporate Training as well if you have any interest in working with me or have any questions. So now I will leave it to you, Megan, to ask questions and share any questions that anyone has.
Thank you so much, Sherry. That was fantastic. I do see one hand raised. Is that a question from an attendee? Maybe, maybe not. I'm going to go with probably not. Okay. Oh, wait, we do have a question here in the Q&A. How long of a process is it to make changes to your awareness?
I will be working on it until I die. And actually each of us is, because it's not an event, it's a journey. And I realize that sounds a little woo-woo, right? But truly, I'm a different person than I was yesterday. I'm a different person than I was this morning. And that's the case for all of us. So it's a process, and it's a matter of identifying, okay, here's where I am right now, and recognizing that I am going to change, that each of us is going to change. But in general, I like to work when I work with individuals, I like to work with them for at least 6 months, because we are so conditioned to think a certain way, to do things a certain way, that life happens. And it's so easy to regress and start doing what we had been doing. You know, if you get sick, if a kid gets sick, if whatever happens. So from an individual standpoint, I really like to work with people for at least 6 months. But it's not that, oh, after 6 months, you have it figured out. It's just that allows people to start really applying the self-awareness they've developed. Does that answer your question?
It looks like it does. We did have someone ask if we are recording this and if we'll send it out, and we are. This will be sent out in 2 to 3 business days after this webinar. And we have time for one more question, and we have one in the chat. It says, how do you help someone that lacks awareness? And how about someone who is aware of how they impact others, but then doesn't change their actions?
Those are excellent questions. So what we can control is ourselves, which is unfortunate sometimes, right? Because we so badly want to control other people. But it really does start with understanding ourselves, because there are often things that other people are doing that are triggering us, and we don't really recognize that trigger or recognize our reaction to that thing. And if we recognize that first, it allows us to change our thoughts around it and shift to more positive thoughts around it. So starting with ourselves and reacting differently is going to, it takes a little while, but oftentimes when we have our own self-awareness and we start to act a little differently and shift our own behaviors, it causes other people to want to be more self-aware as well. But actually going out and changing someone else is unfortunately not possible. And I'm sorry, what was the other question, Megan?
What do you do when you bring it to someone and they refuse to change their behavior?
I think it goes back to really being self-aware yourself, and then changing your behaviors will result in the other person, in some circumstances, wanting to change as well. It depends upon the relationship. There are times that I have helped people identify that there's just misalignment with whomever that other person is, and that person might just refuse to change, or once a person becomes self-aware themselves, they decide, oh, this isn't really something I want to continue being aligned with.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Sherry. This has been great. I know we didn't have so much time for questions, so if anybody does still have questions, please feel free to email them to me at corporatetraining@kirkwood.edu, and I am more than happy to pass them along to Sherry. You can also inquire about bringing Sherry into your organization through that email address, or feel free to reach out to us on our social media platforms. You can find us on LinkedIn and on Facebook. Sherry will also be at our instructor showcase, which is on October 17th from 8 to 11:30. I'll be sure to send out information on that with the email link that I send later this week or next week about this webinar. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for being with us. Sherry, thank you. This was so wonderful. If
Thank you so
haven't
much,
yet,
Megan.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bye.
Mhm. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.